welcome to the Friday episode of the Dolphin Bandits. It's Oren. How are you? You made it through the week. I'm so proud of you. And we're going to give you a little treat today. The treat is Mr. Kerry Callen, one of the best comic book artists going out there today. If you don't know his stuff, look it up. If you love classic comic book art, look him up. He did the Mad Magazine Free Comic Book Day Superman cover that came out in 2024. The art in that is chef's kiss. It's brilliant. I love it so much. Kerry's work takes so many fans back to a simpler time in comics. And I think that's why he has such a rabid fan base and why so many people want him to do covers for them. You'll find out more about him, how he went from doing greeting cards to doing comic books. It's a pretty entertaining story. So here we go, Mr. Kerry Callen. Comic artist and creator Kerry Callen. Sir, how are you?
Good.
So the first question we ask everybody is, how did you first discover comics?
I think it was getting my hair cut when I was really young, which I need a haircut now too. But when I was growing up, we grew up in the hills of Arkansas. So we would have to go into town for a lot of things like haircuts and such. And the barber had old DC comics from what I remember. Things without covers on them, like old Doom Patrols and Metal Men and that kind of thing. So I'm almost positive that's where I first saw when I was like, who knows, 4 or 5 or 6. I didn't get to buy one until I was probably 5 or 6, but yeah, they just fascinated me from the very get-go. Where I grew up, there wasn't much art to see anywhere, so that was something special.
How did you then make the decision to pursue art as a career?
Well, I was always drawing. Um, Sometimes I think about, because when video games eventually came along, I enjoyed playing them, but I think a lot of people was always looking for things to do growing up when they didn't have the mainstay of video games. So I was drawing all the time. My brother drew a lot. And it just occurred to me one day, I think I was in high school. It's like, maybe I could do art for a living since I enjoy it. I didn't have, where I was at, we didn't have art classes or anything like that to push me towards that as a goal. But I just thought it sounded like a fun thing to do. So when I was in college, I got a degree in, what do they call it? Maybe graphic design. I don't know if I even had a name for it, but and then I just started job hunting, and then eventually ended up I ended up at Walmart, the advertising department, which was also in Arkansas. After graduation, and I eventually came into the Kansas City area where I worked for Hallmark cards for 30 years or so. I'm not there anymore. So I'm like a lot of people. A lot of people figure out they like drawing when they're a kid and they just keep doing it.
I want to talk a little bit more about, of course, about your career, but you talked about, Doom Patrol and those early comics and your art. I mean, it's like almost a time machine because it feels just like those books. Like when you see it, it just brings back so much nostalgia. Did you realize at the time it was having such an effect on your artistic style?
No, because I had nothing, like I say, I had no point of reference for
Right.
anything art related. I saw comic books. My brother would bring home coverless Mad magazines from somewhere. We actually got the Sunday paper from another town, but it had the Sunday comics in it. And then advertising, I guess I'd see art. And I do that on purpose now just because it feels nostalgic. And also it's kind of fun just to see if I can get to get it to look like it's actually an old comic. Some of the super antics I did, I was kind of refining my process when I was doing those. I even started putting a different page faintly on the flipped, so it's backwards, on some of those strips, because when you scan in old comics, a lot of times you get that bleed through to the other side of the page. So just to make it look more authentic, I would just do things like that. I just slowly developed the process over time. And that was just for fun to see if I could.
Do you prefer to ink and color your own work, or do you not mind if someone else does it for you?
Well, I've never really had someone else do it. So um, to me, and again, this could be because when I grew up, I just had to do everything myself because I didn't have a group of, comic friends or anything. There just wasn't a lot of people that read comics around there.
Mhm.
So I've always done it all myself. So it would be a different experience to see someone else ink it and color it. Um, at Hallmark, I was an artist for many years, but then I became an art director for half my time there. So I'm sure if someone were to ink and color my work, then the art director in me would come out, at least when I'm doing it myself, I know what I have in my head. I mean, that just started because comics used to be an assembly line, essentially. It
Yes.
was a quicker way to get comics out by dividing up the work that way, you know.
At Hallmark, how did you see yourself grow as an artist?
When I was hired in the licensing department,
Mhm.
which I stayed there most of my career. So, and I think about this occasionally. When I started, it was like the late 80s.
Mhm.
And a lot of the properties we had were, um, well, they came from comic strips,
Right.
newspaper comic strips like Peanuts and Garfield. And we had Kathy for a while, we had Ziggy for a while. Um, so it was always interesting because we actually got to meet some of the creators, like Charles Schultz. I got to meet a few times. Him coming to either Hallmark or a group of us going out there to California.
Mhm.
But actually, that actually had a pretty big impact on me. Um, Not just art wise, drawing other people's characters, but meeting the creators. And when you meet creators, they're super talented, obviously,
Mhm.
masters in some cases, but they're just people. So, it's like you're just poking. It's like you're just a person, So it kind of made me think, well, maybe I should try to do some stuff too. It's just people making stuff.
Mhm.
Um, and that's the reason I made Halo and Sprocket. That was 20 years ago.
Mhm.
But that was me just saying I should create some characters just for the fun of it. So the combination of meeting people
Mhm.
who are successful and being around so many super talented people. Hallmark's not really what it used to be because greeting cards and such demands have really dropped, with all the digital ways to keep in touch digitally. So it's not quite the place it used to be, and they started trimming back
Mhm.
people, um, and have for the last 20 years.
Right.
But just meeting, I was there before all that started happening. So just meeting people. I mean, I was there while it was happening too, but that was it's just so exciting to meet talented and just other artists in general because I never really was around many other artists.
Mhm. You
I feel
mentioned
like I'm tongue tied today. I'm not sure why.
not a problem. It's Friday. I know it's Thursday.
Yeah.
No,
Wait. Yeah.
it's Thursday. We gotta check ourselves on that one. You mentioned working on licensed properties, and these were some of the biggest licensed properties as far as cartoon strips go. I would imagine there were a lot of eyes to make sure it matched up almost exactly with what was being put in the strip as far as a style guide goes, or was it that you have a little more leeway with what you want to do with the character?
Well, it depends on the license.
Okay.
Some things are like, this is what it looks like. This is what it always looks like.
Right.
Here's our style guide. Don't veer from this. But then other properties are like, just do your own interpretation and do different things. Disney actually let us do quite a few things, our own interpretation when we wanted to.
Mhm.
Um, Peanuts, we pretty much stuck with Charles Schultz's line work just because it's so much a part of the characters. Unless we were doing a card, I mean, we did product when the movie CGI movie came out several years ago, and then we would use that style for a while.
Right.
The thing is, even when a movie comes out, because we had Marvel and DC and such too, the thing that's a danger about using movie artwork on product is it has a shelf life. So if you do a card that sells well, then you might find yourself a couple of years down the road, you're having to redo it anyway, because the way the characters look is no longer relevant to a new movie or something coming out. So a lot of times when I was designing products, I tried to just use the classics, like I'll say Spider-Man, for example. You can use a classic Spider-Man and those cards will still sell when the new movie comes out, even if it doesn't look exactly like the movie. I just went off on a tangent there, but
It's fine.
yeah, we had to get approval on everything we did.
And I mean, greeting cards is somewhat like comics too, because there's a variety of them on the wall, and you're trying to catch that person's eye to,
Right.
what they want to pick up on. What are some tricks that you learned to make your cards maybe stand out a little more than other ones that were on the shelf?
Well, I personally always went for a bold, impactful look, you know. So I won't say I won't say that it was always simple, the things I did, but it had a simple impact to it, something that you can read, understand immediately. And also you have to have a really tight, I feel like a really tight relationship between the art and the editorial.
Right.
Just because it's all part of storytelling. I mean, even though greeting cards are just a cover in the inside a lot of times, it's still the same as comics in that you want to have appealing images that tell the story with the editorial, And it's the same way with advertising. That's the thing about being interested in comics. You can apply some of the similar principles to anything, greeting cards or advertising, book covers.
Mm-hmm. How do you start to dip your toe into the comic book world as far as, being part of it?
Well, when I was like a lot of people, I've always loved comics. So I was in college. I thought maybe I should try to get some comic work. And I actually, some of the first stuff I did was for DC when they had the New Talent Showcase book. That was from later 80s, mid 80s, later 80s or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I had an opportunity to do a story in there. I was really raw. I was talking with Dick Giordano in New York. They asked me to come up and talk to him. And he asked me at some point if I had relatives or anybody in New York that I could stay with, because he would offer me an apprenticeship if I did, but I didn't. I didn't know anybody there. He's like, you're not going to make enough money to live, so you need to be staying with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So at about the same time, I got the idea for a comic, which is parody.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, there was a lot of directories to the Marvel universe, directories to the DC universe. So I did a book that has a strange name, directory to a non-existent universe.
Mm-hmm.
Now that was put out by Eclipse Comics at the time. So instead of pursuing a job at DC, I actually thought it'd be fun to do something for a comic company that was just 100% my own stuff. And then I realized how really labor intensive comics are. And I was married, we were starting to have a family. And I'm like, do I want to maybe make money in a way that's maybe a little less draining on a person? So I got a job at Hallmark because we were just doing 1 or 2 images a week at the time. It's changed now as compared to a comic. You got to do what, if you did a page a day, you're doing at least 6 or so a day. I mean, it's labor intensive. But the thing is, I never gave up on loving comics. So I dabbled in them the entire time I was there. In fact, I started working for Mad while I was still at Hallmark, just as a freelancer.
Could you have seen a career if you had signed on with a DC and Marvel and had, a long run on books, or, working on their characters, or just the way you are, did you want to just work on a variety of different things?
I don't know. I was a pretty big fan of the big two, Marvel and DC. Um, I don't know. I don't know what it would have turned into for me, because I've always kind of kept a little underlining goofiness to my stuff. It's just I enjoy a little humor.
Mhm.
So I don't know where I would have. I don't know where I would have gone mentally. I think a lot of people around the same age kind of think the same way. Because I remember thinking, oh, we ought to make it'd be fun to see some of these characters get all gritty and mean and stuff, about the time that Frank Miller started doing Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen. I just think, and I'm probably younger than both um, Alan Moore and Frank Miller, but just a mentality of loving comics. I think it was natural for certain things to start happening in comics. And obviously there were some people that really broke the mold by really thinking differently than what had gone on before. But sometimes I wonder what I would have ended up doing if I would have pursued it more.
Right. Halo and Sprocket, what's the first steps for you to put that book together?
Well, I had decided, like I mentioned earlier, it's like, I want to do a comic. And I thought, I like entertainment that has someone with an outside point of view from humanity, just because I think it's interesting.
Mhm.
So I actually started writing down story ideas and everything and had those, but I wasn't sure who the characters were going to be because everything I could think of had been done and done to death for the most part. Do you have an alien showing up on Earth? They don't understand the way humans act, or is it a robot that doesn't understand? And it just all seemed like it was been done over and over. And then it occurred to me, for whatever reason, if I had a robot, but not by itself, I could also have an angel, and it's not religious at all. It's just getting that metaphysical point of view. Then you've got two different points of view, and it felt more unique. And of course, I put him with Katie, who's their roommate, which is a human, just a regular human woman. So you've got a robot who approaches everything purely logically, and an angel who sees everything metaphysically. And then the truth of the matter is typically something in between, that represents a human experience. So once I figured out who my characters were, it just fell out of me, the stories and everything. But I was working at Hallmark full time. I just couldn't keep up the pace. So after 4 issues of doing a regular comic, I kind of quit. But I've collected, and they were black and white comics, and I've compiled everything into color. So if people want to read something that's a little different, I would recommend it. It gets usually really good reviews from people.
Right.
But this one, once I was no longer at Hallmark, I decided just to bite the bullet and take every single thing I'd ever done and add color to it. So it's available on Amazon.
Let me ask you a question though. For you as an artist, when you added color to it, did it change? I don't know, in your mind, your memories or the art that you had done, seeing it now in color, did it, were things a little different?
Well, I like it. I like it better in color. And also, when I was doing it, I was working full time at Hallmark as an artist, so it was really more of a writing exercise for me.
Right.
So some of the art in those early books, I kept it real simple, just because I knew I wouldn't have time to do complex art.
Right.
But when I collected them all, I actually went back and added some backgrounds, or it was a little empty, or redrew some things that didn't look quite right. I did some of that with the writing too, just fine tuning little things. But I like putting it in color. In my head, maybe they were always in color.
Right.
Um, but it didn't feel like that jarring of an experience for me to go from black and white and color.
I know you said working at Hallmark, there's only so many hours of the day, so you sort of had to put a stop to the book. Did the book end the way you wanted it, or did you have another whole saga and ending in mind, but this is just the most logical way to put a stop to what was going on.
Well, another thing I want to do with the comic is to make comics that were friendly to people that don't normally read comics.
Mhm.
So the stories in it, all of them are about everyday life that anybody can relate to. And they're also short stories. It's like every issue, I forget it, maybe 32 pages. Typically, the stories are like 8 pages long. So instead of it being one continuous story, it was more about incidents that happen in life. There was nothing really to wrap up as much as it's just I just stopped doing it, and it's like I think about starting it up again, but I don't know if I'm in the same mental space that I was back then. By the way, when I also did a book back there, Dirtnap, which is about I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the reason I bring it up is because after I got Halo and Sprocket collected, at some point, I thought I just did like 180, 200 pages. And it's like if I would have concentrated on one story, then I'd have a big long story. I thought that'd be interesting. I think I'll try that. So that's the reason I did Dirtnap, because it is just one long story with beginning, middle, and end. It's about well, it started with the idea that I'd never seen a zombie's body meet the ghost of himself or herself, because you got to, when a person's dead and buried, their physical body is separated from their spirit. So their spirit as a ghost could exist, and then their body could rise as a zombie, and then they have to meet each other. So that's what happens in this. They end up merging, and they end up fighting werewolves and vampires and other things. So it's a fun book. It's in black and white, but it seems appropriate, for black and white, for horror movies,
Mhm.
horror movie stuff. It's pretty lighthearted.
What changes did you notice for yourself as a writer and as an artist from one project to the next?
Um, Changes.
Mhm. Or maybe, evolving as both.
Um, I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit
Uh,
right then.
I'm just saying, or maybe how you evolved as a writer and as an artist from, one project to the next.
I don't know if I've done enough to feel like I'm evolving. I mean, all artists evolve when they draw,
Mhm.
because that's how you get better and better, probably at anything. But that's really true for artists, because it's like, hey, I finally figured out how to draw a kneecap I like. So then you have that in your head, and then you draw it that way for now on. Um, so that's a good thing and a bad thing. The reason I would call it a bad thing is because I think at some point, some artists, instead of drawing like a nose and thinking about a nose as a three-dimensional object and drawing it, they just go, here's my symbol for a nose I've come up with. So I can see that. And I can see that in a lot of comic artists
Mhm.
sometimes. They figured out a way to do something. So that's just the way they do it forever now.
Mhm.
uh, so that I've always tried to avoid that a little bit. I don't know um, if it makes that big a difference to
Mhm.
people looking at my art, but I'm always trying to not just get trapped into a symbol for an eye or a symbol for my mouth, but I'll actually think about the real object.
Mhm. How does your association with Mad begin?
Well, I was still at Hallmark, and a lot of people, when they relax, artists especially, is they do art to relax, and a lot of them will go paint a landscape, or something like that. But for me, again, going back to my childhood, only art I saw was essentially commercial art. It had a purpose to sell stories or um, to share ideas.
Mhm.
Um, so for me to react or relax instead of drawing a landscape, I tend to make parody comics just because it's fun. and stuff occurs to me, and sometimes things occur to me. I'm like, okay, I've got to put that down on paper just because I think it's funny. So I started doing. So I've always kind of done that. With the internet, though, you can do stuff, and a lot of people can see it instead of just your friends.
Mhm.
So I had a presence online with a lot of parody comics and such. And when Mad was kicking off with issue number 1, like they did in 2018.
Mhm.
They contacted me in 2017 after seeing some of my work online, wanted to know if I wanted to do work for them
Mhm.
in the revised Mad, and that didn't work out as well as we had hoped.
Mhm.
But all magazines are having a tough time. So once they lost newsstand distribution, they're still in comic shops. You can still get subscription to them.
Mhm.
They just don't sell as many. So a lot of it now is reprints as compared to when we were still doing all new material and I started with them.
Mhm.
So basically, to answer your question, I just did stuff for fun, and they saw it and asked me if I wanted to do stuff, which I loved. I love working for Mad.
I was going to say, people, we all know it's the humor magazine and Alfred E. Newman, but the art in Mad Magazine, the Jack Davises, and all the people who worked, like if you took away the humor and just looked at the art, it was magnificent stuff. I mean, the parodies of movies or TVs or even the original sketches, and bits that they would do. It was wonderful. I mean, some was very simplistic, some was very detailed, but there's a legacy of art in Mad Magazine that I don't think ever gets the credit it deserves in not just the comic community, but the art community in general. What do you think?
I agree with that.
Mhm.
I wouldn't include me in it, but I agree with some of the classics. I mean, um, some of my favorites, like Al Jaffe, he had a very distinct style, but his humor was just incredible. And the
Mhm.
same way with Sergio Aragonés, his stuff I always loved. And he's an example of an artist, I would say, when he draws, it's just more like he's writing his signature. Or I mean, you know what I mean? It isn't. I mean, it seems to come out of him so easily. It's more like him just writing a message than it is about him, you know,
Mhm.
doing art that takes a long time. I don't know. That came out different than I wanted it to. He's such a natural artist. He makes it look easy. Basically, is what I'm saying.
And this year, I mean, Free Comic Book Day, there you are, cover of the Mad Free Comic Book Day with Superman on it, and a number of absolutely spot on and wonderful strips in the comic itself.
Mhm.
Uh, it had to be just a moment of pride for you being on the cover and knowing it was getting out there to so many
Mhm.
folks.
Yeah, I was real happy with it. It was a lot of it's reprints,
Mhm.
but but I had done a lot of superhero stuff for him. So really about a third of the book, I think, is my work. So that was really fun to see. I was kind of hoping people would love it and, demand that DC puts out a Mad comic again, because that's how it started as a comic book.
Right.
Didn't happen. I don't know how many people saw it. Um,
How does
uh,
parody work with you drawing, the DC heroes or other things? I mean, is it because it's parody you're allowed to make them look a little more like the original characters?
well, Matt has always just made fun of, anybody or anything,
Mhm.
with spot on parodies. And sometimes they're parodies like Super Duper Man instead of Superman, or something. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes they just do a parody. So it's easy with the DC characters because they own Mad. So DC's, it's not like they're going to sue themselves.
Mhm.
Uh, and a lot of the stuff I do is DC. Again, going back to my childhood, since we didn't get into town very often, I
Mhm.
quickly learned that there might be a Marvel comic that appealed to me, but then it would be continued, and I had no way, we go back into town like 3 months later, and I never see part 2 or part 3 or whatever. So I kind of started to learn to buy DC books because they were rarely continued. So I know I would get complete stories. Then when I became a teenager, especially when I could drive, I became more of a Marvel zombie, as they used to say. But I think that's the reason you see a lot of DC stuff from me is it's just ingrained in me. And when I was doing stuff for Mad, it made sense to not change the names. Because I think about it, because I did do, was it issue number 2 in the new one? I did a Spidery Man origin.
Mhm.
So I, instead of using Spider-Man, and then I changed the costume a little bit.
Right.
So that was probably more in line with the way Mad typically does things.
You work not now on covers, did some stuff for the Big Bang Comics and other publications. Do you reach out to them usually, or do they reach out to you and say, hey, we have an idea, we'd love for you to do it?
They usually reach out to me. I stay pretty busy with commissions that I do for people.
Mhm.
And I keep thinking I want to do my own comic project again. I'm kind of indecisive about which idea I want to pursue, though, so I haven't just immediately jumped on it. So I stay pretty busy. So typically I'm lucky that I have people come to me sometimes and ask me to do things.
Mm-hmm.
I need to be more proactive, maybe about finding other gigs,
Mm-hmm.
but it's working the way the way it's working now is pretty good. So
Yeah.
doesn't mean I can't step up my game though.
Well, and it's kind of right for doing your own stuff now because you have the Kickstarters and the Indiegogos and other, ways to get your books out there. I mean, having that, and I know you said that you'd be interested in doing it again, do you think that the time might be right to start up a new project?
Yeah, if I can find the time, it's like I need to spend most of my time making money instead of, something that'll make money later, unfortunately. But I'll eventually do something new. I'm just trying to, well, I'm doing new stuff all the time with commissions, but single images, don't intrigue me quite as much as doing stories. That's just one reason I think I've always loved art is because it's a great way to share ideas, visually. So I like coming up with ideas I think are interesting and then turning it into something.
I would say what is most of the commissions that are asked for? Is it DC characters and that sort of golden age style?
Yeah, but I don't know if that's my own fault in a way because I keep doing it, and people, that's what kind of people know me for. So I think that's the reason they keep asking for it. And then I'm starting to sell stuff occasionally on eBay. I have something that ends today though, so
Okay.
I won't mention it, but this piece did real well for me. As far as selling prints and such, it's a piece of parody art.
Right.
If no one knows, there's a famous picture of Sophia Loren looking at James Manfield.
Yeah.
Kind of the side eye. It's like, are those going to stay where they're supposed to stay? So it's still parody art. I just like doing parody art. I don't know what it is.
If you had an opportunity, or DC Marvel comes up to you and says, hey, listen, we want to put you on a book for a little while, give you a run, which characters would you pick?
I've always been a big Spider-Man fan.
Okay.
I don't know if I keep up on the current situations of the characters though, because I kind of feel like I need to know more than I know currently about the characters in comics.
Mm-hmm.
I still read new comics occasionally.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always loved Iron Fist.
Mm-hmm.
Tigra, maybe. I love Tigra.
Mm-hmm.
I never thought she got treated well after her just initial run of stories in, what was it, Marvel Chillers.
Yep.
Or actually, ideally, I would love to bring back Plop for DC comics, because
Mhm.
that is right in my wheelhouse, and they haven't done anything with it in a long time. Or even the Inferior Five would be fun to do. Um, so if I did have that chance, I don't know if I would go for a serious book.
Right.
Even though humor writers sometimes turn into serious writers and do a really good job at it. So,
Mhm. One thing art-wise that I want to ask you about it, and it's what I really love about your art, and it's something I talked to Steve Root about as well, but it seems new comics aren't as colorful. They're not as bright. It's a little more muddled when it comes to the colors. With your art, it still has that brightness to it. Like each, the uniforms to the background, everything sort of stands out, and it's that refreshing, like you and I said, nostalgia kind of art. Do you think art has become darker, a little more muddled than it really should be?
well, stories themselves have become darker and a little more muddled than they used to be. I mean, who's to say what comics should be? The great thing about comics is they can be a lot of different things.
Mhm.
But I think that young adult graphic novels and stuff, don't they sell better than normal dark muddle? See, here's the way I look at it. When comics first started, they were reprints of funny things, and Superman came along. But at some point, the comics category was super big. You got westerns and superheroes and romance and horror and sci-fi, and you've got all this stuff. But over time, for whatever reason, the majority of things that people that sold, I guess, was superheroes, by the 60s and such. Well, they about went away in the 50s, but they came back in the 60s. So then everybody loves superheroes and all the comics are superhero comics. But then in the 80s, with
Mhm.
the Dark Knight and Watchmen, suddenly superhero comics, there wasn't it didn't feel like it as much as there was a variety in what kind of comics were being put out. They were all dark and serious and stuff. So it was kind of like from all these categories going down to superheroes and then going down even further to kind of cynical superheroes.
Mhm.
Um, so that's, and that's, I love Dark Knight when it came out and Watchmen, but I don't think comics should have got stuck in that mode for decades after it.
Mhm.
So I try to keep my colors bright and bold. It goes back to what I was talking about, like making greeting cards or anything you want to bold, simple graphic of something that people, if you can make a bold, simple graphic of something people like, then that's usually successful, you
Absolutely.
know, if that makes sense.
No,
But
100%.
I don't even know if the market's there for plot and that kind of stuff anymore. Maybe if they build it, people would come, but uh, I've had more than one person tell me that hardcore comic fans don't have a sense of humor. And that's not me saying that, because I've met plenty of people that's had a sense of humor. But if you look at sales, of what sells and what doesn't, there may be a little bit of truth to that.
Could be right. What are some projects that you are working on now? I know you've mentioned commissions, stuff with Mad. What are some things that fans can maybe look forward to coming out soon?
I've been toying with the idea. I can't decide if this is a good idea or not, but um, I could take old public domain characters and do a super antics things with them. Um, but the downside of that is people don't know the characters. They don't know. Everybody knows that Batman has a bat cave and has a bat signal and all that kind of stuff. So to do fun-loving stuff that feels a little bit like a parody, people have to know the original material. So it'd be a different kind of challenge. It wouldn't be super antics in the same way as the stuff I do for fun or in Mad. It'd have to be funny all by itself without knowing anything about the characters.
Right.
So that's one thing I bounce around in my head. I also bounce around an idea for a young adult graphic novel just because it would get me doing something different,
Mhm.
which I always enjoy. Um, and there might be more places to sell such a thing than, you know, uh, another superhero comic or such.
Or you could do.
So, yeah, I'd like to revisit Halo and Sprocket too, but
Mhm.
I never told how they got together in the book. They just all lived together, and you get to see the hijinks that happen. But um, it'd be fun to do one big long story with him. I just haven't quite figured out where the story goes after I get halfway done with it. So anyway, I mean, everybody, all people who write and draw and stuff have more ideas than they'll ever do. I think that's just part of being a person that enjoys doing creative things,
I,
which is better than the alternative of being, I don't have any ideas for anything.
and we're back. Yes. So cool. So cool. His art is so good. He mentioned his graphic novel Dirtnap. I picked it up. Guys, I the whole premise of a ghost finding its zombie just wandering around and being mortified and then linking together is one of the coolest concepts I've heard in a long time. Go to Amazon, check it out, Dirtnap. It's well worth your time. All of Kerry's stuff is worth your time. Find him on Facebook, or he has his site. You're going to love his art. Kerry, thank you so much. Again, as we say with all our guests, because they're all so awesome, we'd love to have you back on, and we'd love to have you guys listen to us again next week. More great shows coming up for you as the year rolls on. So have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next week.